I read somewhere a long time ago that humans are the only species on Earth that deliberately kills our own kind. I don't know if that's true or not, but we do seem to revel in it, even finding more gruesome and effective ways of doing each other in, like crucifixion. In New York, the death penalty has been an on-again, off-again affair for some time. We thought it was kind of put to rest when Mario Cuomo vetoed a bill that would have reinstated it in 1995. For that, the society presented him with our Ethical Humanist Award. But the battle wasn't over. In 2005, we presented the Ethical Humanist Award to David Kaczynski for his courage in identifying his brother as the Unabomber, and for his continuing activism against the death penalty in New York. So far, so good in New York, not so in some other states. Appropriately enough, a day dedicated and associated with resurrection, Ethics in the Theater, our play reading group, is presenting a scene from The Exonerated. This is a documentary play developed by the Culture Project in 2002 about resurrecting the lives of people being held on death row for crimes they did not commit. It was written by Jessica Blank and Eric Jensen. It chronicles the story of 6 citizens, American citizens, not foreign terrorists, falsely imprisoned who were found innocent through DNA testing. We'll hear one of those stories this morning. Our cast for this reading includes Carol and Jerry Chandler, Kurt Collier, Dan Hansen, Andrew Miller, Sean Roberts, Gregory Taylor, and Monica Weiss. The reading was directed by Gregory Taylor, produced by Pat DeBrodner, who's also chair of our Ethics in the Theater Committee. As is usual with Ethics in the Field, we'll follow the reading with a brief discussion and questions that you may have about this play, which Liz Webster of the Innocence Project will be glad to answer for you. And now, here then is the story of Carrie Max Cook.
Carrie Max Cook.
Sandra Cook.
It actually started when I was in the 9th or 10th grade. Me and my friends would, act like we were going to school and then run out the back door and start trying to find a car with keys in it. And I had the misfortune that one of the cars that I stole on my adventures to conquer the world was the sheriff deputy's car, and I wrecked it. Driver's ed I didn't take. And make a long story short, the deputy beat me for it. And that was pretty much it. After that, any robbery, any broken window, any cat up a tree, everything was just my fault as far as that sheriff was concerned. And then fast forwarding, I'm 19, and I'm at this apartment complex in Texas called the Embarcadero, and there's a swimming pool there, and it's where all the hip people hang out. I was an attractive guy. I dressed real nice. It was the 70s, man, and I bought my clothes from the hippest places like the Gap. And I had my hair styled real long, platform shoes and bell bottoms. And I looked tight. And I was walking towards the swimming pool, and there was this beautiful, gorgeous girl, man. Oh, not as pretty as you, but really gorgeous, man. Just nude and fondling herself right there in the window. So I look up and I said, oh my God, man, wow. Because I had lived a very sheltered, naive life. I'd never been to a strip club before, and I'm seeing this total, complete, mature woman, and I'm going, okay, yeah, that's cool, man. There's this chick laying. Anyway, a couple days go by, and I'm back at that pool, and there's this chick laying out there. Well, to make a long story short, we started talking, told her I was a bartender in Dallas. Of course, I was working as a gay bar, but I didn't tell her that. I'm just stretching everything as much as I can because I want to be all that plus a bag of potato chips. Anyway, we end up going back to her apartment. Well, made out.
but not all the way.
Oh, no. I was in there maybe 30, 40 minutes, whatever. And I got cold feet because she was so aggressive, and I left. And I didn't ever see or hear from her ever again until I'm arrested for her murder 3 months later, August of 1977.
The courtroom for Carrie's trial.
Since June 10th, 1977, Tyler, Texas has been screaming and crying for someone to answer to this crime.
The state of Texas would object to that being far beyond the scope of this case.
I am going to sustain that objection.
They had found a fingerprint of mine on her door frame.
And they had a fingerprint guy whose knowledge of fingerprints at that point was a 6-month correspondence.
Lieutenant Doug Collins is an expert fingerprint technologist. He will testify that he found a fingerprint belonging to the defendant, Carrot Max Cook. It is as clear, ladies and gentlemen, as the day you put your footprint on your birth certificate. That officer didn't have any reason to lie. He will narrow the time element of the leaving of those fingerprints.
Objection, Your Honor.
You can't date a fingerprint. It's scientifically impossible.
It cannot be proven what time those prints were made. This would place in the minds of the jurors that the defendants were there at the time of the murder.
Is that all you have?
Yes, ma'am.
Your motion is overruled.
That judge let them say all through my trial that I left that fingerprint there at the time of her murder. And this next part has been hidden for 20 years. Linda, that's the victim, had been having an affair with this guy Whitfield, a professor of sciences over at the university, and everyone had just found out. He was fired from his job, he lost his wife, he lost his kids. It was a whole big mess. And her roommate, Darla, had seen somebody in the apartment the night of the murder who she said had silver hair, medium short, touching the ears fashion, wearing white tennis shorts, just like Whitfield. In her police report, Darla says she sees this guy Whitfield in the apartment that night and says,
Don't worry, it's only me.
and goes to bed. But at the trial, she turns around and says,
That's the man right there.
and points to me. And my lawyer didn't even argue with that. My attorney was the former DA who jailed me twice before. He was paid $500, and in Texas you get what you paid for. So they had a lead that the victim's boyfriend, Professor Whitfield, had done the murder. But they didn't go after him. They went after me. They said the crime was done by a homosexual maniacal murderer who hated women. The prosecution accused me of being a homosexual before the jury.
A young woman lies in her grave not far from this courtroom, butchered because of Carrie Max Cook's warped homosexual lust for blood and perversion.
Objection, Your Honor. The defendant's alleged homosexuality has nothing to do with the allegations in the murder indictment.
Objection will be overruled.
We would then request an instruction to the jury that they cannot consider.
That motion will be overruled.
You would then request the court to declare a mistrial in this case.
Overruled. Proceed, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I would be remiss in my duty if I did not show you every last grotesque detail, because the killer sits right before you in this courtroom, and it is time for 12 good people from this county to put that man on the scrap heap of humanity where he belongs. He has a warped perversion, and he will not reason with you. The victim is a young woman just beginning to realize her dreams, and he butchered her body. This is the kind of sick perversion that turns Kara Max Cook on. You people have no right to even submit prison guards to the kind of risk this man poses. Think about it. Do you want to give this pervert his butcher knife back? Now, we must look upon it as putting a sick animal to sleep. Kara Max Cook has forfeited his right to walk among us. He has no rights. So let's let all the freaks and perverts and murderous homosexuals of the world know what we do with them in a court of justice. That we take their lives.
And you know, at a capital trial, the prosecution always says, he's dangerous, he's a maniac, a sick, twisted murderer. But I'm no different than you. I mean, I wasn't a street thug. I wasn't trash. I came from a good family. If it happened to me, man, it can happen to anyone. So, they accused me of being a homosexual, and that got into the media. That got to death row even before I got there. So, in prison, I had 3 guys pull a train on me, and they raped me, and sodomized me, and they carved good P-U-S-S-Y on my behind. And it's there all over my body. It's cut so deep I can't, plastic surgery won't remove it. It's not a tattoo. And I attempted suicide a couple of times with this whole little war I was fighting on the inside. There, the criminal justice system, and then on the Western Front, I'm fighting with fear of my life with these inmates every day. I was holding on for my brother. I can't tell you how close we were. He wasn't just a big brother. I worshipped him. He was my role model. He was everything I wasn't. He didn't smoke pot. He made straight A's in school. And I was the black sheep of the family. My brother was always trying to rescue me. He's very strict on me.
No, Carrie, I'm going to lose you. I'm going to lose you. You're going to get hurt.
And then there I was, sitting on death row. He was taking up for me my whole life. I was just always a real soft-sensitive person, and I guess that's why I had so many girlfriends, because I was so sensitive. I don't mean girlfriends like girls sexually, I mean friends that are girls. And so my brother, the last time I touched him was at the Smith County Jail. He reached in and he held my hand, and he was crying, and he said,
It's not over, Carrie, because you're not going to die. You're going to get out.
I was the baby of the family, and my brother would come and visit me, and I had all these black eyes and stuff, and he said,
I want you to tell me who did this to you. I'm gonna talk to the warden.
You don't understand. You'll get me killed. That's called snitching. That's the worst thing that you can do. So I forced my brother, when he thought he could help me, I took that away from him too, saying you can't help me. I'm on my own now. So he started drinking. I mean, the guy had it all, man. He was a senior supervisor at this huge corporation company, and he fell into the bottle. Lost his wife, lost his kids. He'd sit around in a dark room and get drunk and talk about his little brother. Why isn't he coming home? He put himself right there on death row with me. So he's working as this assistant manager at a McDonald's in downtown Jacksonville. And there's this guy named Jeff works there. Jeff said that my brother told him that he liked him because you look a lot like my brother Kerry. And that's how they got to be friends. So anyway, one night after work, they go to this club in Tyler, Texas, and they're shooting pool. You know how you get when you're drinking beer and you're hot with a stick. And right now it's closing, and my brother's running the table on this one left guy. And then Jeff says,
He said, you go on. I'll be out there in a minute.
and Jeff's walking out of the club, and there were these two black guys sitting on the table, and one of them's wearing sunglasses, and Jeff reaches up. He was just playing. He takes the glasses, he puts them on, and mimics Stevie Wonder. And the guy says,
Say, what's up with you, man?
and this guy jumps off the table and gets real aggressive, and he's like,
I'm gonna bring a world of hurt to him.
so about that time, my brother walks up and says,
Hey, man.
my brother's really laid back. You know, he wasn't a violent dude. I mean, he was real laid back, compassionate person. But Jeff just says, man, fuck these people, and walks out. So my brother follows him outside. It's December 27th, 1997. It's really cold that night, and my brother and Jeff are both trying to get in the car, but the locks are frozen, and this pickup truck pulls up behind my brother, and my brother turns around, and this guy, he got out of the truck with his hand behind his back, and he says,
What you gonna do for me, white boy? You gonna call me nigger? What you gonna do for me?
there were all kinds of people standing around, and my brother told him,
Hey, look, man, we've been drinking tonight. This is nothing to have no misunderstanding about. Tomorrow morning, you're gonna wake up and laugh about this.
and he says,
Fuck you, man.
and he brings from around his back a big old 44 Magnum, and he shoots him. And my brother, it's so weird, man. He rose up and he stood up, and Jeff walked over to him, and he couldn't even tell he was shot. His eyes were fixed, looking straight ahead. And blood started pouring out of my brother's nose, and he fell. And he died on that parking lot. And with me being on death row, the DA was reluctant to take it to trial. She said the defense would claim that my brother had bragged that he had a brother on death row and he was bad. And so they got my mom and my dad to agree to a plea bargain. And the guy who killed my brother got 10 years. And he got out in 3. My mother would look me in the eye and tell me I'm responsible for my brother's murder. that if it wasn't for me going to death row, he'd still be here. She would tell me that. I know it's going to sound corny there, and I mean it. Every day that goes by, I wish I could tell him how much I loved him. So while you got it, man, never take it for granted, because you never know. You know, when I was in there, I saw 141 guys go down. All I got to do is to pick up the newspaper and turn on the news. Such and such becomes the 222nd inmate executed resulting from capital punishment. And I hear the name and I say, oh my God. Because I know him. I mean, I just don't know him. I ate with him. I cried with him. We played basketball together and talk about, oh man, you're going to go free. You know, I got a book about Texas death row. And seriously, that book is what, 5 years old? And everyone in there has been executed. I can go through that book one by one and point out every face in there that's gone. So, then after I've been on death row for 22 years, they find this DNA evidence, you know, and the prosecution says that this will be the final nail in Carrie Max Cook's coffin. We'll show the world once and for all that he committed that murder. And then the results come in, and it did just the opposite. It finally took the nail out of my coffin. It told the world the truth, that was Professor Whitfield's DNA they found on that girl. And he's still out. They never even went after him. He's been walking around a free man, laughing at the system for 22 years. 22 years.
The tragedy is, of course, that this is not just good theater, it's a true story. Let's thank our cast once again: Carol Shamlin, Jerry Shamlin, Dan Hansen, Andrew Miller, Sean Roberts, Gregory Taylor, Monica Weiss, and our director, Gregory Taylor, and, of course, Pat DeBruck.
And Kurt.
And Kurt. On another Ethics in the Theater note, our next reading, regularly scheduled meeting, will be of Good People, a reading David Lindsay Abair's play, Good People, on April 12th at 7 p.m. in this room. Now let's talk a little bit about this play. Any questions you all have, and Liz Webster of the Innocence Project will hope to answer them.
Oh, wow, questions. First, I just have to say, you just really did the play justice, all of you. I was really moved. You know, I've seen the movie and I've seen it performed before, and I don't know if any of you are professional actors, but I would have thought you all were. You did an amazing job. Let me just quickly put what you've just seen in context. There are actually over 100 individuals that have been exonerated from death row on the grounds of innocence, and over 300 people exonerated through DNA testing nationwide. So those are people that were maybe just sentenced to life, or shorter sentences for other unusually violent crimes, rapes and murders and aggravated assaults and things like that. In addition, we feel that there are probably still innocent people on death row probably innocent people that have been executed. And we are, the Innocence Project, is a nonprofit legal organization working to help exonerate those folks through DNA testing, but also to reform the system. So several of the themes that you heard in the play are things that we attempt to address in our work. Certainly the bad forensics, the prosecutorial and police misconduct, the inadequate defense, all of those things are things that we're trying to change through legislation. And we were founded in 1992, and that is significant, especially because one of our co-founders, Peter Neufeld, is the son of an Ethical Culture Society member. So I'm happy to, I'm sure there are a lot of questions to come out of this. I just want to address the woman in the glasses that had her hand raised in the beginning. Yes.
What year, around what time was DNA, around what time was DNA implemented in the courtroom? When, the human genome and all that, what precisely was the time in which they were able to use DNA to obviously be able to let people who were innocent go? So when did that change take place?
Well, it's interesting because I think DNA was first used in the criminal justice system by prosecutors, and then that was around 1988, 1989, and then defense attorneys really, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld started to use it for their clients in their cases, and the first DNA exoneration was in 1989, and then it just really picked up steam, in the 90s. And a lot of our work has been trying to, kind of educate prosecutors and make sure that we have laws in place that allow the DNA testing. It really didn't pick up speed until later in the 90s, I think, because there was some resistance about what is the science really showing, and it took a while to show, to convince people that yes, this is actually proving innocence in specific types of cases.
Here.
Oh.
How do you go about selecting a candidate for your project's work? What's the criterion? How do you find out?
Okay, we receive about 3,000 requests for assistance each year, and that's just our national project. There are also kind of smaller state-based organizations nationwide that do this work, but we receive about 3,000 requests. We go through them and don't try to determine guilt or innocence on paper. We really just look at whether or not there's DNA evidence available, and if there is, if it would be dispositive of innocence. So in other words, if you have a sexual assault and the victim is, or the perpetrator is saying that it was consensual, a rape kit will, merely show his DNA profile is there. So that would be an example of the kind of case that we wouldn't accept, because we need to be able to exclude them.
I know it's implied, but I just wonder how many people are actually killed, and then you find out that they're innocent.
Well, we do know of a case in Texas. Made me wonder, when Mr. Cook was saying that he had seen all these, people executed, if one of them was this man, Cameron Todd Willingham. You could look into his case. He was executed in 2004 for an arson murder. And that's an example of the kind of situation that we wouldn't have any DNA testing, but the arson science is such that it's, become a lot more scientific over the years. So that was a case that, experts looked back at it and said, actually, this is not probably an arson, this is probably an accidental fire. And his 3 children died in the fire. So he was on death row, and then a man with a very similar case named Ernest Willis was exonerated based on almost the same evidence. So that's one example of a case that we believe was a wrongful execution. And there are a couple of other people who have been proven innocent through DNA that died in prison tragically and were posthumously exonerated. Ken?
My impression of this play was that it was a very excellent play, but that the criminal justice system is outrageous down there, absolutely outrageous. And this man should have been exonerated 1, 2, 3. I mean, if he would have had a better criminal defense attorney, he should have been appealed. The judge was outrageous, the prosecutor was outrageous, and the man that got off at 3 years, that was outrageous. And it was just a terrible thing. It was just horrible, horrible criminal justice procedure. And why did they appeal it? Why couldn't they appeal it? I don't understand. What they couldn't get away? How could the judge and the prosecutor get away with that?
Well, I'm not going to really be able to answer that specific question, but I do have to. Alarmingly, Mr. Cook is still fighting to be exonerated, despite his inclusion in this narrative. He has not been officially exonerated yet, and you can, read up on that. But basically, on the eve of his 4th trial, this is after his conviction had been overturned, but he wasn't being called innocent. On the eve of his 4th trial, he decided to plead no contest so that he wouldn't have to serve any more time. Shortly afterwards, the DNA test results came back on, the victim's underwear, showing that this other person probably committed the crime. And the Innocence Project is still, representing him on a pro bono basis, along with some other attorneys, trying to get additional DNA testing to convince the court to, and the prosecution to drop the charges. They've been very, very insistent on his guilt.
I'm from Texas. I'm from Texas originally. And Texas just seems to have a terrible record for wanting to send people to prison and to execute them, I think, more than any other state. I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. And tell us where the Innocence Project is located, would you?
Sure.
Are you here in the city, or?
We are located at 40 Worth Street, between Church and West Broadway, and we take national cases. So when you look at the states that are sort of, I guess, the leading in the DNA exonerations, Texas is, the winner, and has, I think, 47 people have been exonerated through DNA testing in Texas. But if it makes you feel any better, Texas has done a wonderful job of compensating them. Texas has the best compensation statute in the nation now, and provides social services and all the rest. So, but that's something, really, and I think some of the district attorneys there, especially in Dallas, are kind of leading the charge and recognizing that justice is terrible in Texas.
Tell me, is Kerry Cook in jail now?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No, he was released in 1997.
Okay.
And so it's just that he is recognized as being innocent. He isn't able to get any of that money from that great compensation statute. If he can't travel internationally. If he gets pulled over, the cops will see this on his record.
I'm very interested to hear more about the compensation. When you think of a person losing 22 years of his life, you wonder how he is being at all compensated for that.
Mr. Cook is not being compensated at all. So, and a lot of times, even in some states, parolees are given, and we certainly think that's wonderful, and that parolees should be given everything that they're given. So it's not an indictment of, parole services for people who have been paroled, but exonerees actually often don't even get what parolees get, things like, counseling, educational services, job training services, things like that.
Very often, I imagine, you take on a case and you lose. It also occurs to me that prisoners might be playing the system or playing you in order to stall or for their own purposes. How often does that occur?
Well, I think we're always updating our statistics on this, but when I mentioned that we get over 3,000 new requests for assistance every year, you know, a small minority of those are accepted, and of those, an even smaller subset are able to get DNA testing. And of those, I think it's something like 50% are proven guilty. A number of them, the testing is inconclusive, and then the rest are exonerated. So yes, I mean, definitely, you know, people do game the system in that way, but I think also, tragically, it's a little bit more complicated. In some cases, people have convinced themselves that they didn't do it, and I know in conversations with the attorneys that have to make those phone calls and say, you were included in the sample, you know, that's never an easy call to make. It's often, you know, it's often a very sad, you know, thing for that individual to hear, even though you would think they know they're guilty.
We have a mic over here.
Yeah, you folks work always in the back end of these things. You know, someone has been convicted, and then if the crime is of the sort in which physical or forensic evidence can be found, then you look after that to see if they can be overturned. But it occurs to me that there's a bigger problem, which has to do with the freedom of prosecutors to do whatever they want. This came out very, very, very strikingly in this case at Duke University a couple of years ago. So the criminal justice system we have allows the prosecutors pretty much unilaterally to decide who they're going to indict and bring to trial. And once you indict somebody and bring them to trial, even though we have a jury system and everything else, there's a reasonable probability that a conviction will result. Is anybody looking into a possible way of putting some checks and balances on the way prosecutors behave, so that they don't have this, you know, I mean, they're supposed to have grand juries, but in fact that's not a meaningful check. Is there any movement to try to get some checks on these people to make sure that they're reasonable, they do reasonable things?
Yeah, absolutely. We were involved in a kind of consortium of organizations that did a nationwide tour last year, going to, you know, Austin, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, here in New York. I can't remember them all, but traveling around and basically holding symposiums with local prosecutors to discuss these issues, and we have, you know, reports on them and everything. It's a little bit hard to legislate for, but I will say that there are often also a lot of great partnerships that we have with prosecutors. And, you know, I mentioned Dallas County earlier. The Dallas County District Attorney's Office has really helped exonerate a number of people, has taken it upon himself to go back and look at some probably problematic cases, get the DNA testing. So, you know, it's a mixture, and really, you know, we do take prosecutorial misconduct very seriously, but on the other hand, I think in 80% of the cases that get to the DNA testing phase, prosecutors willingly accept that we're going to do the testing, and then if the results are exclusive, they, you know, help us move forward in exonerating people. So I don't want that to get lost either, you know, that in some jurisdictions, prosecutors are also really helping to lead this movement.
Hi, a wonderful, wonderful platform today. My question is, once DNA has proved conclusively that a person did or did not, that the person did not commit the crime, have you ever encountered, or has the Innocence Project ever encountered law enforcement authorities who drag their feet to release the individual? Or have you ever had someone not released even though the DNA said that they did not do it? And my last question is, what has been the length of time between the determination made by the DNA and their release?
Well, I mentioned in the early years the difficulty with trying to gain acceptance of DNA testing as kind of an exonerating tool. So I think in those years, if I had the statistic in front of me, I'm just throwing it out there, maybe, 5 years or something. I know of one Florida case, Wilton Dedge, a gentleman who was, there were several rounds of DNA testing showing that he wasn't included on all kinds of different evidence. And the prosecutor's office just really kept fighting it and kept fighting it. So, yeah, we have definitely had cases in which clients continue to be incarcerated even after they were proven innocent. And then, another much more common scenario is in which the prosecutor's office would just, never apologize, never recognize the person as innocent. They'll finally, kind of say something like, well, we don't have enough evidence to retry you, so we're dropping the indictment. That's not the same as saying, we're so sorry. And so I don't know if we have that statistic. Anecdotally, I will just say that it seems to me that is probably the case in at least, 50% of the time, that it's quite rare actually for a prosecutor or a judge to make an apology, a public apology.
Okay, time for one more question.
Yeah, just a quick question. Most of the people who are on death row tend to be poor people, let's face it, very simple facts. In the case of prosecutors, obviously it would be the DA's office or somebody who pays for the DNA testing. Are there cases where people want to have the DNA testing to prove that they're innocent, but they just simply cannot afford it? Is that where you come in? I can't imagine this DNA testing being cheap and people just go and say, well, I want DNA testing.
Yes, absolutely. And again, in the early years before we were established, we started out at the Yeshiva University at Cardozo School of Law, and so we were funded very largely through the school. In 2004, we became a nonprofit, and that was really when we were able to start providing DNA testing as part of, a package of top-notch pro bono representation. And now, we pay for the DNA testing in our cases.
What does it cost?
We recently, I'll just try to give you the sort of high end. We recently exonerated a man named Damon Thibodeau from Louisiana, and he had served 15 years on Angola's death row because, it was a murder case, and because he was on, it was a capital crime. Many rounds of DNA testing had to be done, and ultimately I think $10,000 was spent. The Innocence Project didn't, we shared the cost actually with the prosecutor's office. So that's a perfect example, but yes, it was very expensive. It's not always nearly that expensive, but there's always going to be at least more than one DNA test that has to be done in every case.
Excuse me, we have to move on because we've got to end here. But we'll be back this afternoon. 1:45 is actually meeting with a real victim of or somebody who benefited from the Innocence Project. And you'll have a chance to ask more questions this afternoon, 1:45 in this room. And thank you.